You never know what's going to happen in your life that is going to change the outcome or the path that it's on. Whether it's an experience, good or bad at the time, it is something that you can definitely draw on as you move forward. And when used in the correct way, it can provide fuel or fire to become that person that you were meant to be. This week's episode, I sit down with Heather Hernandez, who has suffered both a career-ending injury as an athlete and then another tragedy shortly after she started college that would completely change the course of her life. I think you're going to enjoy this episode. Hopefully we can get together and do a part 2 very soon because there's a lot that I would like to go back over with her. This is the No Excuse to Miss podcast. Welcome to the No Excuse to Miss podcast. I'm your host, Scott Volquartsen, and this week's guest is Heather Hernandez. Heather is a former boxer turned coach and gym owner who is based out of Las Vegas. How are you doing today, Heather?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I am good. Thank you for taking the time to join us, even if we did have a few technical difficulties getting this started.
No problem. Technology, huh?
Yeah. So before we jump into it, I do want to ask really quick. I just saw on your Instagram the other day that you were out at the range. Is that something new that you're getting into, or have you always been a gun person?
I've always enjoyed shooting guns. I'm trying to become more of a gun person. Okay. I know my gun, but I have been getting out a little bit more this year. Just trying to be more well-versed with different types of guns, safety scenarios, becoming, I guess you could say, a gun girl.
Just trying to become more capable all the way around?
Yeah, I just want to be well-rounded. I mean, I feel really good with my boxing, my self-defense, and, you know, it's Vegas. It's a little crazy in the city sometimes. I'm working late hours. You know, I have a lot of clients. I'm just kind of sometimes in situations where maybe your hands are not enough.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome. And was that Pro Gun Vegas you were at?
Yeah, that was out here in Vegas.
Okay.
A buddy of mine runs a CCW course, but he actually specializes in courses that are just helping women get better with their guns in case scenarios where they might actually have to use it in self-defense case scenarios.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, let's kind of jump into it here before we get before we get too far down the rabbit hole. Can you give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah. So I'm from Vegas, born and raised, grew up here. I went to college up in Oregon. So aside from my years in college where I lived in Oregon, I've lived in Vegas my whole life. Played sports growing up, did basketball, softball, track in college, moved back home to Vegas, started boxing. Turned out I was actually really good at it. So I started fighting, got invited to the Olympic Training Center up in Colorado Springs. And 6 weeks after that, I tore my ACL playing women's tackle for the LFL. So once I blew my knee out, then I kind of had to shift my focus a little bit. And that's where I really got deep into coaching, self-defense, and just kind of handing the tools over to other people.
And did I read or hear somewhere that when you initially injured yourself, you maybe rushed back before you were completely ready and then re-injured yourself again?
That's right. Typical athlete. Yeah, I went, I had my surgery and I had a full ACL replacement. I have a cadaver in my knee now. So, you know, that takes quite a bit of recovery. But I had got invited. I don't know if you remember the LFL. It's a women's football league.
Yeah.
Tackle football. So I had got invited out to play. Vegas had a team at the time. And of course, my boxing coach was like, hey, you can't play tackle football. You just got invited to the Olympic Training Center for boxing. Like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, coach, I'm an athlete. I can do anything. So I tear my knee the first game of the season, go through surgery, do a little bit of rehab. But then I get a call from LA coach football team asking me to come to their training camp. Tryouts were coming up. And, you know, I didn't want to miss that deadline. So I went to training camp. Did great. And then the very last drill of the day was a lot of hard cuts. I re-injured my knee on one of those hard cuts. And then I really just had to actually sit down for about 1.5 years and properly rehab my knee before I could go full force again.
And how many years ago was this?
This was about 5 years ago.
Okay. So when you said you picked up boxing after college?
After college,
and you picked it up fast enough that you were invited to the Olympic training?
I picked it up pretty fast. I moved home because I would say I moved home from college probably about 8 years ago. And when I started boxing, I just needed a sport to do. Any like, former athlete knows once you're done with college athletics, if you don't go pro, what do you do? So I was kind of in that weird space, like, oh, I'm not playing sports anymore. I started losing my mind a little bit. And a member at my gym I was working at the time was like, hey, why don't you come try out boxing? So I just did one or two workouts and he was like, you're a natural. I'm going to introduce you to this guy. So I do a couple workouts with this guy. He's like, whoa, you're a natural. You're super good. You're a southpaw, which like in boxing, being a southpaw is an advantage. My frame, like tall, slender, athletic, I was fighting at 132. I walked around at 135. It was just like almost meant for me, So I got with a coach who was held national titles in Cuba. That's where he was from. And then he came over here to America, was pro, like did great, started coaching. So he started coaching me and really developed me. He would have me do conditioning with his professional guys, just like worked me into the ground, but I did have a lot of raw talent. And I mean, I did really well in every amateur fight that I had.
Did you have any experience like growing up, like with mixed martial arts or just martial arts, I should say?
No experience at all, aside from me and my brother fighting each other for 10 years straight. That was my experience.
That's pretty incredible, actually.
Yeah, no, honestly, like when I think about it, I wish I would have done boxing as a kid because I absolutely would have went to the Olympics easy. Like, and most people who box start when they're kids. When I was a kid, there wasn't like boxing in schools. It was just your basic basketball, football, cheerleading. Even nowadays, you see boxing and wrestling in the high schools. You see a lot of girls wrestling. It wasn't like a super huge thing when I was in high school. So I just, stuck to basketball and softball. But I really wish I would have found boxing earlier.
So as you started moving into the coaching side of it, recovering from your injury, how were you able to take, because it looks like when you do something, you go all in. I've seen you say like you're go, go, go.
Oh yeah.
when you have that mentality combined with your natural ability, how do you then, or how hard was it for you to scale that back and be able to start teaching it to people that may not have that same mindset or natural ability?
I would say in my beginning years of coaching, it was a little tricky. And it was just kind of learning people, learning experience, learning that not everyone has athlete go, go, go mentality, but everyone is capable of having that mentality. And I really found as a coach, I think almost how to like pull that out of people. And that's really where I've found a lot of success in my style of coaching is pulling people who consider themselves average people into an athlete mindset, into an athlete work ethic. And I really truly believe that everyone has it, but you have to find out where you can tap into it and pull it out of them.
And I would assume for each person, it's very individual on what that is that's going to pull that out of them.
Yes, everybody's a little different. I really think to get it, you just kind of have to naturally be a people person, have that like emotional intelligence, be able to read a person, read the room, because some people need that drill sergeant boot camp yelling in their face, but some people need like a very calm conversation and letting them know how important it is what we're doing. And then everything in between those two extremes. So you really just have to connect with that individual and kind of figure out what their hot button is, what's going to get them to that level.
And something I found interesting is, I guess in my mind, if you tell me somebody that wants to get into like conditioning or boxing, I have like an image of who that person is.
Yes.
But in following along with what you're doing, you have people of all ages and all skill levels. Which
Correct.
To me is very interesting watching, like, let's say an older woman go train with you on the boxing side of it.
Yes, absolutely.
Because like I said, we have this image of who a boxer, quote unquote, is. So do you find like you've had to battle like that stereotype of getting into some of the older demographics to come into your gym?
I would say it really hasn't been a battle because, like you said, most people picture someone who's boxing as like a typical boxer. They're probably really ripped and have muscles and crazy in shape. And like you said, that's what we all picture as a boxer. And I've done really well with opening up boxing to normal people because what I found doing boxing after college, boxing is a sport that anyone can do. You don't have to be in college. You don't have to be a professional. You can be a girl, a guy, old, young. You just have to get into the sport. Now, if you're competing, there's different categories for that. But I'm someone who's like showed an old 65-year-old lady that she can get in the ring. And as long as we learn basics and we learn proper technique, she can box. I teach, like 14-year-old boys who have never boxed before. As long as we go over basics, anyone can be a boxer because it's such an individualized sport. If you have the proper coach, a good place to do it, really, you don't have to be this ripped athlete. Joe Schmo down the street can become a boxer if they put in the work.
Well, and the other side of that is I've seen a bunch of people who are ripped and look like they're very physically fit not be able to last one round, just the conditioning side of like boxing because of the workout and, what it requires from a conditioning level.
Oh, absolutely. It is a surprise to a lot of people. You see boxing on TV and you just see these people fight for 10 rounds and they're going and going. And almost every person I've ever put through a boxing workout will tell me, wow, I really underestimate what I see on TV. And I even train some of the guys I work with who are other trainers, and they're like these big, ripped power lifters. They look intimidating, 250, 280 pounds of stacked muscle. And we'll get in the ring and I'll start doing mitt work and no bullshit, 1 or 2 rounds, they're dying, they're bent over, they got their hands on their knees. They're like, what the hell is this?
Well, and I think I told you that when we met in Las Vegas that, I had done it out in Santa Monica and I could not believe how out of shape I was when it came to even just doing some basic drills for any extended period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So
boxing is another ball game.
So if you have your choice, do you prefer like former athletes or those people like that? Or do you like, the ones that maybe you're able to build up their confidence and start from the ground up with their conditioning and everything?
I really get a different fulfillment out of both that I would say I really appreciate both of them. And it kind of depends on the day. There's certain days where I really enjoy my athletes because they give me a workout. Like when we're going hard on the mitts and they've got power and they're quick, I'm in there, I'm sweating right there with them. They really sharpen my technique, my skills. I'm going hard, I'm going fast. And that's what I get when I train my athletes. But then when I do train my people who need to build their confidence, who are just learning how to throw a hook, how to turn their hip, and you kind of see that light bulb go off where they feel more capable, they feel confident. It gives me a little bit more fulfillment. Just bringing someone who doesn't feel that confident or great about themselves into feeling like they're a badass. I honestly really love that the most.
And that kind of goes back to, what you mentioned earlier, where you have to read the room and know who you're dealing with. And I think it takes somebody like what you're doing to be able to bring that out of certain people.
Oh, absolutely.
Is that something you've always been able to do, or is that something you've learned just since you started coaching?
I think that I've kind of always had that in me since I was a kid. I can just remember always knowing what's going on, always being a little bit maybe ahead of my age. When I was a kid, I actually used to get in trouble all the time for being sarcastic, all the time. And they're stop being sarcastic. You're 8 years old. And then somewhere I read an article that mentioned, although I don't support this, or I'm not saying, be like that, but sarcasm in kids is a sign of intelligence. It just means they're kind of catching on and able to almost joke around with adults, which obviously I got in trouble for a lot. And when I got a little bit older, my parents were very, spoke to us, let us know what's going on, just always in the loop. So I never felt like we were kind of talked down to and stuff like that. When I was in first grade, going into first grade, they wanted me to skip first grade and go to second grade. And I was so against it because all my friends weren't going to come with me. But aside from that, when I went to college, I actually studied criminal justice. I wanted to be a juvenile probation officer at the time. And then taking the courses, I learned that it's not as much as being out there helping people as I thought. It's a lot more being at a desk pushing paperwork. So I didn't go that route, but in that degree, you have to take so many psychology courses. And it's emotional intelligence, how, like, what to look for when people are lying, what to look for when people feel uncomfortable. How do you know someone trusts you? Like, just psychology. And I, at the time was like, oh, what a waste of classes. I'm not even pursuing this degree anymore. But all that I learned, I use in this business, and it has really helped me flourish.
And it reminds me a lot of even like running our business, where I wish I would have paid way more attention to psychology classes and learned much more on that when I was younger.
Yeah.
Because as we've grown our business, it's not necessarily a coaching business, but, managing people is a very similar thing.
Absolutely.
Where everybody is very individual of what, like you said earlier, the drill sergeant mentality may work with one employee, but that will completely backfire with the other.
Yeah.
And I always joke that it's, sometimes like my role anymore is more doing a lot of that different type stuff, just managing people more so than anything.
Yeah, I agree. I think when it comes to any business, no matter what the industry is, the most important thing is managing people, managing relationships. And that's where, it really comes into just having that intuition, that emotional intelligence, reading people, reading the room. I think in a lot of cases, the way you interact with people can get you much further than a degree and a piece of paper.
I would completely agree with that. And that, even goes, like in our case, it goes for working with customers too. You have to be able to read them and interact with them, and have to be able to, I guess the biggest thing, this probably applies to your coaching as well, is you have to be able to listen to what they're actually saying.
Yes.
Far too often it's easy to be thinking about what we want to say or what our comeback, especially I'm a very sarcastic individual, much like you are. So my instinct is I want to respond with something completely sarcastic right away.
Yep.
So I've had to train myself to sit back and actually listen to what's being said and realize that maybe not every situation needs a smart ass remark.
Right.
And my family would tell you I have not learned that yet, but I'm a work in progress.
We're all a work in progress.
So another question I had for you is, like, with the gym and going through all that, how challenging was that, like, over the last couple years with lockdowns and all the different things? On one side, obviously the healthier we are, the better the outcomes seem to be with the pandemic.
Yes.
But on the other hand, they were shutting all the gyms down, not allowing people to, go train and have that outlet. But then from the business side, how difficult was that for you?
To be honest, when the whole shutdown first started, it was extremely difficult because, that's your whole business. Like, people coming into the gym, people training, people being around other people taking a group class, like everything that is the gym business was completely shut down. And honestly, for the first couple weeks, I think everyone was like, oh, hey, cool, little vacation. But after that, my clients were antsy to get right back to work. So at that point, I had a garage gym, so we would train in my garage. We would go to the park and train. I do have a very serious bunch, and they didn't wait till things opened back up. We got right back on it. And it really did make me a better trainer. It just like solidified to me that having a gym and a ring and like all of that it's luxury, and I love it. But all you need is a jump rope and a couple hand weights, and you can hit that park and make any workout happen, any conditioning. There's no reason to not get your workouts in. But on a business side, the whole shutdown made things really hard. We have a private gym here, so it was a little bit easier as far as crowding goes. Everyone who comes here has to be with a trainer, so we don't just have a bunch of random people coming and using the facility. So that helped us quite a bit, but it was definitely a struggle for that time where things had to be shut down.
Did it make you rethink like your business model as far as like possibly going online doing training versus everything being in person?
Absolutely. I really, I'm kind of old school, so I've always been like prioritizing in person, being with them, seeing what they're doing, like reading each other, having laughs. But through this whole pandemic, it made me realize, there is a way to do it all remotely, to do it all online. And it's actually made me put a larger focus on opening up more online training, even like virtual training where maybe they're just on their laptop and they're seeing me on my laptop. And that's kind of like that middle ground. But I will say in 2022 and going forward, we all don't know what's going to happen. Every business should have some type of online something where a consumer can still purchase, can still interact, can still connect through an online platform.
And I know the one thing in talking to like other trainers and people in your line of work, the thing that they always come back to is going online allows them to become more scalable.
Absolutely.
Because, as much as you like the in-person training, there's only so many hours in a day that you can physically be with clients.
Yep.
So
that's kind of what.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's the one thing I've always heard kind of come back when talking to other trainers, and is they love being on the gym floor, but they can't scale it to the scale that they want to take their business.
Yes. If you're a trainer and you have like big goals, you have to be online because, like you said, at some point you're going to have to scale, and we can only be in the gym so many hours a day, so many days per week. Even if you're working 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's still only a certain number of sessions you can do. Now you're trading your time for money. So at this point, if someone like me, like I want to be able to reach as many people as possible, help as many people as possible, and I want my business to thrive. The only way you really get to that next step is starting to scale and go online. If you just hold yourself to that in-person training only bubble, there is a wall you're going to hit and you'll never go past it until you're online.
And I think in today's world, and especially in the fitness world, is if somebody's looking for a trainer, probably one of the first things they do is go online to try to figure out what they're doing. Then they go on Instagram to see, which
exactly
makes it very difficult, I'm sure, for you, because there's so many people I'll just use Instagram, for example, that have big followings and they're doing this training or so-called training, but they really have no qualifications whatsoever to be doing it.
Yes.
And then you hear of people getting hurt or, just burning a lot of money with no results to show for it.
Yep. And that is one of the unfortunate parts about being completely online. And that's what I tell clients, do your research. Most of my clients come from word of mouth. Like I get my clients great results. I treat them really well. Like they have a good time. We hit our goals and I'm very qualified. I have all my qualifications. I have my experience. But, I'll tell people when you're looking for a trainer, like ask them what their qualifications are. Ask them what certifications they hold. If they don't have a certification, that's a red flag right there. That's a bare minimum. What's their experience? Just because you have a big following on Instagram and can hold a dumbbell doesn't make you a quality trainer. And I think that's more what people need to do a little research on when they're looking for somebody.
And I've had a friend tell me who is in that business that at some point, no matter how big you want to go online, you have to put the hours in on the gym floor, working with people, with people in a gym, not everything can't be virtual in order to learn the skills that are needed to take that online, if that makes sense at all.
Yes, no, it does. And that's like what I agree with the most is being on the floor and really learning what you're doing. Because you'll see too, a lot of trainers who are online and they're posting all these programs, but they're never really in the gym or on the floor or doing tutorials. It's just a bunch of random online programs that they post. And that's another area where there's kind of maybe something for people to look at. You want a trainer who's actually practicing what they preach, who you see in the gym, who you see performing the deadlift correctly and not just telling you how to perform it correctly. They're showing you.
Completely agree. Do you think your injury, and I guess your secondary injury as well, make you a better coach now than you would have been if you never suffered that?
Absolutely. I was probably, I had to be around, must have been in my mid-20s, early 20s. And at this time when I was in training, I always I would get clients who had a bad knee or a bad shoulder. And I'll admit it, back then in my head, I was like, stop being a fucking pussy. It's not that bad. Just kind of ignorant to it because before I blew out my knee, I never had a serious injury. I would have sprained wrists, sprained ankles. But once you tear ligaments in a joint and you feel instability of a joint, you realize how important it is. And so my approach after that was totally different in the way I rehab athletes and even average people, even if they don't have injuries, how important it is to listen to your body. It really made me step back and not be so ignorant to certain things. And realized how important every function of every joint and every piece of your body really is to sports, to athletics, to training. Everything you feel in your body is a signal. And if you pay attention to that signal when you first hear it or feel it, you can overcome almost anything. But if we wait till injuries happen, it's going to be a lot harder after that.
And I've never, knock on wood, I've never had a serious injury when it comes to like a knee or anything like that. Is there a mental side of it too that you have to begin to be able to start trusting? Like in your case, your knee again, or if it's somebody's shoulder or something like that, you know, the first time they get back under heavy weights, or, you know, like in your case, and when you were playing football, when you make those first cuts, is there a mental side of that is this going to hold up? Am I going to re-injure myself?
Yes, there is a huge mental side to that. And I think that is maybe the hardest part to get over. Because, like, you know, me, I'm an athlete. I'm already about go, 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 go. But after I really started rehabbing my knee and I would go back to like full force cuts, there was a little bit of fear, a little bit of hesitation. And it only takes a little bit of fear and hesitation to screw up a whole play. It's just like a millisecond of hesitation. And it takes a while, honestly, to get out of that mentally. And that's me being an athlete having to deal with that. So when you have, you know, an average person coming back from an injury, theirs is even more. And they come into the gym with a lot more hesitation, or they're like, this trainer, you know, did this, screwed up me here. So I am very patient. Like, I always start with lightweight. Let's get into it. Let's move your body well before we even put weight on you. But I would say, like, even when someone is fully recovered, it's the mental part that you need to fully recover before you can say you're really 100%.
And on that mental side of it, how hard was that for you when the injury ended your athletic career? Did you know Did you know it was over at that point?
Kind of, sort of. I wasn't really looking too long term at the moment, but when they called me with the actual results, you would have thought that they told me they were amputating my leg. Like, I just remember crying. I called my dad. I called the guy I was dating at the time, like, just in tears, like, my ACL is torn. Because, you know, at this time I had just got invited to the Olympic Training Center for boxing. I had just started playing with the LFL, which they just started airing their games on TV at this time. There was an all-star game that was in Brazil. And through football, we had like early picks for who was going to be going to the all-star team. The coaches had me in there. Like, it's like I just had all these opportunities opening. And then when the AC tear happened, to me, it was just like, oh, my dreams were crushed. Like, you know, it's hard to look long term. You just think right now, especially when you're in your early to mid 20s.
Yes.
It's like right now, it's like my life is ruined. And because, you know, when I originally had the injury, like, I knew I tore my ACL, but I just was in denial, and I didn't have results for about 3 weeks after. And once the results came in, that's when I knew it was real. And even up on the surgery day, I remember laying in the bed and the doctor was marking my knee. And I was like, Doc, do you guys ever open up someone's knee and you realize the MRI was wrong and the ACL wasn't actually torn? And he's like, listen, girl, your ACL is torn. Just accept it.
So
it was hard.
And was it a struggle as you went through your recovery? Like, obviously the physical side, yes, but mentally as well, getting back to where you wanted to be or where you thought you should be?
Yeah, that was the hardest part, honestly. Like, I'm such a go, go, go person. I'm such a perfectionist. And honestly, like, I'm just very athletic. Almost anything I've ever done, I pick up right away. There's not many things that I struggle with. So when I do, like, it's very hard for me. And I remember, you know, after surgery, like, you're in bed for a couple days, you can't do anything. And then you're on crutches, and then you're in a straight leg cast. Like, there's just so much time that you can't do anything. So then once you're finally allowed to go to the gym, you want to do everything. I'm like, I want to run, I want to jump, and you can't. You just have to go into the gym and do body weight squats only to a certain degree, only this to a certain weight. And there would be days where I would be like in tears, like, just seeing other people, young, fit people, do all these things that I wanted to do, and almost feeling like a new person at the gym. Like, there's just so much I can't do right now. And honestly, having such an athletic performance background, like, those were hard days. Like, I was really hard on myself because I couldn't do what I wanted to do.
And what did you find helped get you through that? Just hard work and keep being persistent at it?
I would say persistency and determination, because when I would see those people, like athletic people, fit, doing box jumps, sprints, all I could think is like, I want to get back to that so bad. I want to get back. I want to get back. And it honestly motivated me and made me grow up a little bit, because the whole reason I had to wait even longer is because I went to that damn football camp too early against doctor's orders. Like the doctor told me it's too early. I didn't listen. So at that point, like it really made me kind of grow up and be mature and be like, hey, if I want to do this in the future, I have to slow down right now. Because if I keep trying to go, 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 I'm going to hurt it really bad and maybe I won't come back from that. So it definitely like made me grow up a little bit as far as how I take care of my body and just how I handle anything, like taking time and doing it right the first time. So it's not worse and a more drawn out process when you go at it again.
So that leads me into my next question. And this is something we talked about when we were in Las Vegas, is now hearing your story about how everything you're like all in, go, go, go. The one thing we talked about was, and I should preface this by saying we were out there honoring John Bartolo after he passed. We were at an event at his studio, which I wish we would have met under much better terms. But at that time, you talked about him. He was helping you, kind of find out everything or the ins and outs of you starting your own podcast.
Yes.
And when we were out there, we talked about how there's so much doubt that we have. Does anybody want to listen? What's it going to sound like? How do we do this? How do we do that? And the one thing I found is, and I spent 2 years saying I was going to launch a podcast before we ever did. So I can definitely relate.
Yeah.
But I find it interesting that given your background and your mentality of go, 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 then that this kind of is something that I don't want to say dragging your feet on, but something that you're a little more reluctant or leery of getting into.
We can say I've been dragging my feet, honestly. Yeah. And that's kind of where like prioritizing and moving things around to make sure that the things you really want to accomplish, you have time for. Because like I said, I was supposed to start my fitness podcast about a year ago. And that's something like, me and John had talked about, because of course he gave me shit like, yeah, well then what's your holdup? And I really did like get so consumed with just like being such a good in-person trainer and kind of having a problem telling people no. So like, oh, I used to never work Sundays. Now I train people on Sundays. Oh, I used to never train people past 7 p.m. Now I train people till 9 p.m. I kind of let that side of work spiral. And I became that adult that I always said I would never be. I'm like, I will never be that adult that doesn't sleep and drinks coffee and just works. And then I became that adult who didn't sleep and drank coffee and worked. And it's kind of something me and John talked about, like, training all these people who want to come train with me is a great thing. But if I don't have at least 2 days a week to work on my podcast, my marketing, my hobbies, where is it really going to go? Because once I get that podcast going, how many more people can I reach now? A lot more than, the 60 people I see in a week.
Exactly. And I can, like I said, I can relate to that because I did the exact same thing. I would find any reason at all that, well, now wasn't the right time to start it.
Yeah.
As soon as this project's done, then we'll start it. And then it was, well, how about after, like for us, our trade show season? After trade show season, we'll start it.
Yep. That's exact. And it's so like, it's easy to fall into that because we are busy and we do have so many other work projects, but then that's where it comes to prioritizing. Like maybe I should take one day out of the gym and sit down in my office and get my podcast together, get my resources. And I think when it really comes down to it, it's like that fear a little bit, even if I don't want to admit it or people don't want to admit it. It's like, I know I'm so good at in-person training and people want to see me. They show up, like you've got it down. And then you have that fear of like, who wants to listen to me on a podcast? What if they don't want to hear what I have to say about fitness? What if they don't agree with what I'm trying to do? What if it just sucks? And you get to that part.
Well, and I had all those and I still have those. And then on top of that, I'll say, what if I say something that, what if I say something that's wrong, just factually wrong and I get blasted for not knowing what I was talking about, which is very possible and probably happens all the time.
Oh yeah. I think that's like a real normal human fear. I've honestly, so since I met you, I've actually made a lot of progress. to getting the podcast going. There's some things I got to keep under wraps for now, but we'll communicate outside of this. But I've got a place. I'm getting the content together, so that will be being released here the next couple months. But like one thing I've been concerned is I'm like, damn, cancel culture is such a thing now. What if I say some shit that offends somebody and then everyone cancels me?
And like you said, that is a real thing.
It's a real thing now. I'm like, oh my God, here I go. Like I did a podcast and I got canceled after 1 week.
Well, and and that brings me up to like speaking of cancel culture. This is something I wanted to ask you is with your background being in the boxing world, and we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but what's your take with the whole men competing in women's sports stuff that's going on right now?
It honestly pisses me off and sickens me. I just like, there's no reason for a man to be in women's sports. And I fully support the transgender community. I support everyone following their own life. If you want to live this way, you want to be transgender, guy, girl, red, yellow, brown, I don't care. As long as you're a good person, do what you want to do. But on the flip side, if you're a man, you should compete with other men. And if you're a woman, you should compete with other women. These men getting into women's sports that clearly have an unfair advantage, the way their body is built, the testosterone levels they have, there's just no sense of fairness in there. And I think you see it a lot in fighting sports, which is the one that is just, it's the saddest to me because you see these transgenders just beating the shit out of girls.
Yeah, like obviously swimming's been the one in the news. But nobody's physically getting hurt there. I mean, you're taking away opportunities from women, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
But there's nobody physically getting, injured or hurt like what's going to happen in combat sports.
Oh yeah. And I think maybe that's why people are like not thinking it's as a big deal as it is with that all swimming because, well, no one's getting hurt. But it's like, hey, this girl should have got that scholarship, but now this guy's getting that scholarship. And I'll say, I think that young man was ranked, 462 in men's swimming?
Yeah.
And now he's ranked
yeah.
So like, if you're ranked 462, you're mediocre. There's nothing great in there. And then you go to women's and you're ranked number 1 and number 2. If that is not a clear indication itself of what the difference is, I don't know what else people need to see. That there is a difference in either compete with men, or I'm also in agreement with transgender athletes having their own category and they all compete with each other.
And I've heard that a lot, like even as it relates to the UFC, that if it ever goes down that road, that's almost what would have to happen.
Yeah. Because think about it. There is a very high number in the issue we all talk about the most is a transgender, a man turning into a woman and competing against women. But we don't really hear too much of a woman turning into a man and competing against men because she's still going to have the disadvantage because she's still a woman.
Yes.
So, and I think the fact that we don't even see a lot of that, but we see all these men coming into women's sports is because there is a clear advantage going as a man into a women's sport. And there's not a really huge advantage as a woman going into a men's sport. You're still at a disadvantage.
Yes. And I completely agree with you. And I think it's a sad world we live in right now when this becomes one of our number one news topics.
It's crazy. Like it's so unreal to me. And I think like people, like me and you, I assume are just like, what the hell's going on? How come these people can't see that it's so crazy?
Absolutely.
But they're just so immersed in it that if you actually just stepped back and just looked at facts, looked at science, not opinions. Facts and science, you can't argue. Opinions, you can argue all day. But the facts and the science prove everything that people like us think about it. And they're still out there pushing this shit.
Yes. And it's, I don't know. At some point, I hope it has to end.
I really it has to end. And it's only going to end if people like us keep speaking about it, speaking up about it. And like, I have friends that are gay, lesbian, transgender, like we're all cool and they know I support. And even those friends disagree with what's going on with the sports, especially this young man who's like getting into the women's swimming. Even the transgender people think it's bullshit, but there's this little 2% of people that think it's fine. And like, those are the voices that we're hearing.
Yes. I completely agree with you.
It's just not, it's like if LeBron James decided to be a girl tomorrow and join the WNBA. He'd
Yeah.
he'd kill it, and people would be like, "Okay, that's not fair."
Yeah, 100%.
I don't know, Scott. I don't know what's going on anymore.
That makes two of us. But like you
Gosh.
said, I think that's where, but so many people are afraid to speak out about it because, like you said earlier, you don't want to get canceled the first week you launch your podcast.
I know, right?
So
Well, honestly, that's a big motivation for me actually getting the podcast going too, because it's going to be based around fitness, but that's not going to be the only thing. Like, we're going to talk about topics that people don't want to talk about. And I have a pretty good following with my clientele, and they're just ready for me to start it. And one of the girls was like, "You're going to be the female Joe Rogan. You'll just talk about anything." And I think that's what we need out there is people who are not afraid to speak up. Like, I'm never going to put somebody down and make someone like feel like shit, but I'm going to talk facts. And you know what? If people try to cancel me, go for it, because I have a lot more people that support me and believe what I'm trying to do.
well, and I think given your background as a, college athlete and now, on the boxing side of it, as a former boxer and as a woman that you are very, qualified to speak to those points.
Absolutely. And I agree with that. Like, getting people who are qualified to speak about it are the ones we need to not be scared to speak about it.
Completely agree with you. So just a couple more questions, because I know you're up against time a little bit, is where do you see your coaching going in like the next 3 to 5 years? Do you see it much more online?
Well, in the next couple of years, I do see it being more online, because as much as I love being with my people and being at work, I don't want to work 7 days a week forever. I don't want to do 10 sessions a day forever. Eventually when I get married and have kids, I want to be home. I don't want to be that person who's always away at work. So my big goal right now is getting the majority of my training online, doing the tutorials, because I get requests a lot from, people in Cali, New York, Texas. Oh, if I lived in Vegas, I would train with you. And once I start rolling out these online programs where they can follow my video from step 1 all the way through and learn at least the basics of boxing, stance, how to throw a hook. And then for boxers, we'll have programs that are conditioning, technique. They already know the basics. But I definitely would love to be primarily online. And then I just come to the gym for a couple hours a day, a couple of days a week.
And that would be awesome. And I think you're on the right track there. So last question, this is a question that I ask everybody, is I always feel like there's I call it like a pivot point or something that happened in your life at some point that has kind of put you on the course to where you are now.
Yeah.
Whether it was good or bad at the time it happened. And I don't know if your injury was that, but can you point to one thing that, you look back on now and, draw from that experience?
Yeah, if I could say the main thing, to be honest, and this could get deep. It could even be in a whole nother episode, honestly. But
we're good with that.
Yeah, honestly, I'm totally fine with that. Because I do think the more we share our stories and our struggles, the more people that hear it and see that you made it out, the more other people feel like they can make it out. And to be honest, when I was in college, my very first year of college, I was a freshman, I was 19, my mom passed away very unexpectedly. And I had just moved away. I was only in Oregon for a couple months, and I got the call. And I came home and, I just dealt with it. Funeral, you're a 19-year-old kid. Like, how teenagers are. They don't really spend that much time with their parents. They'd rather hang with their friends. And I felt all this guilt. And I remember going back to school. I was always like a starter. I was always the star of my team. When I came back home from that funeral, I did not play the same for the rest of college. I was a little bit just kind of out of it, like being in the outfield and daydreaming or thinking off somewhere else. But, you're a teenager. You don't really process.
And, looking at it now, I'm sure it's completely understandable that you went through that.
Oh, yeah.
Given what you had to deal with at that point.
Exactly. Looking back on it now, it all makes sense. But, I remember like being in the outfield and missing easy balls. I remember swinging like at nothing, just like not being this all-star performer. And my mom was my biggest fan when it came to sports. Like she was that mom, like, that's my baby, you go girl. Like if anyone said anything to me, she would tear them apart. Like she was that mom. So then, you know, I really wanted to drop out of school, and my dad's like, no, your mom was so proud of you for going to college. You need to stick with it. So I stuck with it, but I did what I had to do, but I just couldn't get back to that place I was in. It took me 3 years, I remember, to fully kind of just get out of that weird place I was in. But once I started to get out of it, and as I've grown, like, I feel like I really did not appreciate life and this opportunity that we have here and time and other people until I went through, my mom's death. It completely changed me as a person, the way I view like you, the way I view somebody I meet, the way I view pain, work ethic, like time. I was just kind of ignorant and immature before that happened. And as much as it hurts, I don't think I would be doing everything I'm doing now if I didn't go through that.
And it's first, I'm sorry to hear that you even had to go through it in the first place, but it's inspiring to see how you were able to take that and turn it into, I don't know if I want to call it a positive, but turn it into a experience that you could draw from.
Yeah.
Because so many times we see when something like that happens, people can become almost like a victim to it for years and years afterwards, where they can't move past it. They don't move forward. And they almost always say, well, in your case, I lost my mom when I was in college and I never really recovered.
Yeah.
So I think it takes.
You meet people like that a lot. I mean, and they're not living a life they want to live. They're not successful. They're not pursuing their goals. And it always comes back to this really tragic thing that happened to me and I could never recover from it. And like I said, you meet those people a lot. And in that time that it was happening to me, like I thought I was going to be one of those people. I was like, I'm never going to be happy again. I'm like so sad. I never knew a human could feel so much pain. Like my biggest cheerleader and supporter is gone. And, through that strong will, you get out of it and you become tougher. And then all of a sudden you're your biggest supporter. You're the person who makes sure everyone else is good. You're the person who has to get things done because you pull yourself out of a really deep, dark hole. And I feel for the people who don't ever get themselves out of it. Because like I said, I think everyone's capable, but you have to work to get out of it. It takes a lot of effort.
And at least when I've gone through stuff, I found you have to be willing to open up and talk to other people. At least for me, yeah. I did. It's almost impossible or very difficult to try to do it all by yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I was on a pretty, I wouldn't say bad, just like a dark track until I went to college with one of my best friends. So she was from Vegas too. We grew up together. And her mom had actually set me up an appointment with a counselor that was in Oregon at the time. And I was so against it for the longest time. And she just kept bugging and bugging. So I finally went to this counselor. And at this time, I was pissed. Like, I hated the world. And I started talking to this counselor. And I remember the first day just like crying the whole time, crying. The first couple times just crying. But then I would cry a little less. And we would talk a little more. And sometimes she would say certain things that made me feel better or made me think that there's a future beyond all this pain if I can get past it. And it took her helping me to help myself. And that's what I needed.
On it, in meeting you out there and in talking to you since, it looks like you're definitely on the right path. And I would assume, something like that also makes you a better coach just because you can relate to people being in a dark place or in a in a downward spiral or whatever you want to call it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely really helps a lot because people come in and they are in a dark place in their life or they are on a downward spiral. And that's a lot of why they are seeking something that they think can help them, getting a trainer, getting fit, dropping the weight, getting back into that sport. And it has allowed me to connect with people in a way that they know it's genuine. Like I'm talking from a place of being there. And it's like kind of like the injury. Like before I went through that, I didn't have a lot of I guess, sympathy or patience for people who were going through sad things. I just thought everyone should be tough and get over it. When I would hear people talking about suicide and all that, I would just like scoff at them. But then I went through it and I felt those things. And I was like, well, I never thought I would be a person who would consider these thoughts. But here I am, because when you go through something like that, there's no words you can put into it how deep it hits you. And when you get out of it, all you want to do is help other people get out of it.
100%. And I can completely relate to that. Like you said, I think we could do an entire another podcast on that, because you don't know this about me, but I lost my sister 5 years ago. So I can relate to something completely unexpected like that happening.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh, thank you. And it's like I said, we could probably go a whole other podcast about different things there. But I know, speaking of your coaching, you have a client coming in here real shortly. So I want to let you go. But where can people follow along and see what you're doing?
So they can check out my Instagram. It's going to be at heatherhernandez.lv. I'm actually doing some rebranding right now. So soon I will have a new website up. Once I get the website, we'll put that out there. The website will link to the podcast. So that will link to the YouTube. Everything will be kind of launched here in the next month or so. But for the meantime, I would say go to my Instagram. You can check out my training videos. I post a lot of things on my story, my main page. It's mostly fitness, boxing. Some of it's comedy, some of it's politics. Sometimes I'm posting things that get me canceled, but I'm still here.
Well, I've really enjoyed this. I want to thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, no problem. This was honestly great. You're a cool guy. I really enjoyed, just meeting and talking to you, even though it was under those circumstances here in Vegas. But I mean, I'm definitely down to go a part 2 on this if you are.
Yeah, let's make it happen.
All right.
I appreciate it. And as always, I thank everybody for listening. If you have any questions, hit us up at podcast@volquartsen.com. Thank you.